Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey everyone, welcome back. Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton. And this week we're going to talk about repairing damaged relationships. So kind of the opposite of what we talked about last week, which was marriage advice. And we gave a lot of really good tips and references on making a marriage work or any long-term committed relationship, really. So now we're going to change gears and talk about what to do when the relationship is damaged. And we thought of doing an episode on divorce. And Dr. Burton brought up a really good point in that he almost never recommends divorce.
Right.
Obviously, there are circumstances when divorce is warranted. So abuse, long-term
physical abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Extreme emotional abuse. Yeah.
Yes. So tell me about that. You never recommend divorce, almost never.
Almost never. And here's the reason why. When you talk about how to repair damaged relationships, this is what I do because people who come and sit in my office, there's something that's not right, with their relationships, and so that's what we work on. But they have to be the ones to make the choice to get the divorce themselves. I think there are some therapists. I know this happens. There are some therapists who do say, "Okay, it's time to get a divorce." I would never say that because I don't live in their shoes, and we can just talk about behavior changes, what you can do to improve the relationship. But in the end, they have to be the ones to decide, is it time to end the relationship or not? So I don't think it's my place. And in fact, people ask me sometimes, not that often, I'll say, that is your choice. As long as they are coming to sit in my office, I'm going to do whatever I can to help them repair the relationship. I just think it's a better use of the time than me saying, okay, get a divorce.
I agree. I think that's a really great philosophy. And one of the things that we've talked about a lot in the past is you have to realize that you're bringing together, like you call it, too many cultures. You're two very, very different people. And that takes adjustment. It takes time to learn to get to know one another. But I think that there's always hope. I kind of agree that divorce shouldn't be an option.
Well, I think it's a lousy solution to most problems. And I want to make it clear for the listeners, as you said at the start, but I want to reiterate it, that there are times when a divorce is appropriate.
Absolutely.
And so if I see a couple where there's clear physical abuse going on and threat, then I will recommend that the person, usually it's the woman who's being abused, but that they get out, and I'll try and help them find a safe way to do that, because that could be a whole nother podcast on. That's a very dangerous time for women to leave a relationship. But so I just want to be clear, there are times when a divorce is appropriate. But I think that most often, I've never seen a marriage where it's just one person issue. Yeah. I really haven't. Sometimes you might see one person where their behavior is really big, I call it, and loud. And as soon as you get them to quiet down that behavior, then all of a sudden the other person's part in the relationships becomes more clear. So you each have parts of the relationship that you're involved in that don't work. And you each have the issues that you bring to the relationship. So if you get a divorce, depending on your age, the chance is pretty high that you're going to end up in another relationship. You're just taking that same problem with you.
Exactly.
So you can deal with it right here in this marriage, where often there's children. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. Or you can go somewhere else and have the exact same issue pop up, because guaranteed it will. And that's what I try and help them see, that your part in this will follow you wherever you go. And so you might as well stay here and solve that. Now, I think the issue with children, I have kind of a strong opinion on this, but it's pretty well backed up by research, what we call longitudinal research on children of divorce. If there are children in the marriage, then I have a pretty strong opinion about this. And it's backed up by some longitudinal research, which is they follow children of divorce, from the time of divorce to when they're in their 50s and 60s. And divorce is very difficult on children, both
Yeah.
mental health wise and even physically. It's difficult. And so the only time that the research shows that that it's in the best interest of children is if there's a lot of overt fighting. So a lot of really
Okay.
angry fighting that you're seeing. Certainly if they're witnessing any type of physical interaction, then that's not good for the kids. And in fact, in the state of Utah, maybe other states, but in the state of Utah, if a child witnesses domestic violence, then that's considered child abuse. And so, and the person, who's committing the domestic violence, maybe even both of them, can be taken in for child abuse. So that's how serious I think that is. But otherwise, if, there's not a lot of overt fighting, and you're getting along and maybe you just, aren't liking each other that well, then it's really in the best interest of the children to stay together. And I know a lot of people have problems with that. And sometimes, as adults, you brought these kids into the world and maybe sometimes you make that sacrifice. But that doesn't mean it's in the best interest of the adults, because often it's not. And so somebody loses here. That's my problem with divorce. Somebody's always going to lose. It's going to be the kids or the adults.
Right.
It's just not a great solution, I don't think.
I tend to agree. And I know that for some people, maybe divorce is inevitable. And people, again, they're adults, are going to make their own decisions. But I mean, one thing I do want to say that I'm sure you're going to agree with is if there is an instance of divorce where children are involved, it is very, very important to never talk bad about your spouse to or in front of your children.
Which, you can say that as many times as you want to people who are getting divorced.
Oh, I know.
And the problem is, so here's my experience. Usually when a couple divorces, one of them doesn't want it.
Okay.
And so when the one doesn't want it, they get angry. And even they get angry at each other. And so the anger at each other takes over. And they can even say, oh, I don't want to put the kids in the middle, or I don't want to say negative things. And it is just so easy to fall into that trap because you're so angry at the other person. But you're right. It is so important to keep the kids out of it. Now, here's the other thing, and this is a little bit of an aside talking about divorce, but I think that if you have children and you divorce, the optimal way to do it is that you keep the house, or at least one house, the kids stay in the house and the divorced people move in and out for custody. Most people can agree, yes, that's the best thing for the kids. It almost never happens because, again, the adults are concerned about their lives and what's going on with their lives. And when it falls apart, if it does happen, when it falls apart is when each one or the other goes into another relationship. And then that new wife or that new husband doesn't want them going back to the house to be with their kids. So I know it rarely happens, but if you're talking about what's best for the kids, that's what it is.
Right. And I think also one of the reasons why it is so important not to badmouth your ex, your spouse, is because no matter what, that kid is still 50% that person.
Right. And they still love that other person. No matter what.
Exactly. Yes. I heard you talking about this on the radio just Monday, is that they're going to have fond memories.
Right.
And hopefully they will continue to. So hopefully that you guys can figure out a way to co-parent, and hopefully it's a situation where your spouse can still be involved in the child's life. And you need to remember that is still that person's mother or father, and they're still going to have a relationship with them. Don't taint it because of your decisions.
Right. And I think that, I think that a lot of people don't understand both parents are equally important, I believe, even in a divorce situation. I mean, there are going to be cases like the one we discussed on the radio on Monday where, the father's in jail. So that's obviously not a typical situation. But in the vast majority of divorces, I think both parents are equally important to those kids.
Yeah. And don't try to mitigate that because you need your parents. Yep. So, okay. Yep. So let's talk about kind of two things at once. The top 3 causes of divorce, which I know people can just Google. And we'll talk about that maybe in terms of the reason why couples come to counseling, or kind of what you've seen, your perspective on the top reasons people either get divorced or the top reasons that they have for needing counseling, needing an intervention in their marriage because it feels like it's at the end.
Okay. And so I didn't Google it, so I have no idea what Google's going to say.
Okay.
I'm basing this just on my years of treating couples. And so I think that I'll go from three up. So the first one, I think I'm going to label it betrayal in general. Now, John Gottman wrote a book. It's called The Science of Trust. And I want to be clear, I'm not recommending the book. I don't think it's a very good book. But but in one of the chapters, he talks about betrayal more than just an affair, which is going to be my number two thing. So these are different ways that people often betray their partner. And he has 12 different, I won't read them all. Betrayals by secrets, lies and deceptions, betrayals, coalitions with others against the partner, betrayals by disinterest, which I always thought was an interesting one. They stop expressing interest in their partner. Betrayals by unfairness and lack of care. See, these are things that we often don't think of as betrayals, but I agree with him in this, that, when we get married, for most of us, we're making commitments of some kind, and those commitments may be different, specifics. But for instance, betrayals of affection, betrayals by lack of sexual interest. Like, for instance, I'm not going to have sex with you. We often find this in counseling room, is that you have two people, they get married, they agree to be monogamous, and then one of them decides, oh, I'm not going to have sex with you, which leaves the other one kind of stuck. Because they still want to have a sexual relationship, but one person has opted out. Now, Gottman thinks that's a betrayal. I agree with him. Betrayals by abuse, betrayals by disrespect, betrayal by not meeting each other's needs. So I think that third one for me is just betrayals in general. The second one, and this, at least for me, doesn't happen that often, is an affair. So a sexual or an emotional affair. I certainly see a lot of them. It's just not every relationship that comes in. That's why it's not number one for me. But often when that happens, the couple just decides to divorce and they don't go into counseling. But the people, we can talk a little bit later about what the steps are to repair from an affair, because I really believe you can. And I have seen it many, many times where couples can effectively repair. And what's interesting, once they get to the other side of the repair, I think this is almost always the case. They say their relationship is in a better place. Now, I would never want to wish an affair on anyone. I don't think this is a good way. I don't think this is a good way to go about improving your relationship.
There are many better ways.
But it actually can, if you go about it in the right way. And I've seen it happen. So I think the number one reason that people come in is what I'd call emotional disconnection. And that often is expressed in a number of ways. One is, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. And often what happens is they lead parallel lives, as I call it. And, you can even have kids together. Maybe you've got two careers. And what's happened is you've forgotten how to connect. And I think one of our last podcasts, we talked about the importance of having date nights and working on the relationship. And so a lot of couples just forget that. And so 20 years on, and the kids often are around, a junior or senior in high school. And they're just, the parents can see, okay, 1 or 2 years and these kids are off to college. What are we going to do? And I hear that a lot, and so they've neglected their emotional relationship. Often their physical relationship is still pretty good, but they've neglected their emotional relationship for 15 years. And then they decide, okay, we better work on it. That's a very hard place to be, because if you become emotionally disconnected from your spouse, that is the hardest place to come back from. And I think the reason is because you don't want to be vulnerable. And, vulnerability, you have to be vulnerable in order to be emotionally intimate. And so if what you're wanting is that emotional intimacy with your partner, and you have just spent 10 years protecting yourself from being vulnerable, that is a tough place to come back from.
Interesting. Yeah. So we'll circle back to that. Maybe how to avoid that, I think, would be a good step. So I took a parenting skills class a number of years ago in college, and we talked about the top reasons for divorce. And I think she gave statistics or something like that. But she said I remember the top two reasons was money and sex, the top two reasons, which kind of coincides with what you've said.
Right. So I would put the sex one in that third part of betrayal of sexual interest, which often happens. But they all go together because in order to really have a good sexual relationship, I think you have to have a pretty good emotional relationship, meaning you've got to have a great dialogue going on about sex. And so what happens is a lot of couples, they just let it go. They don't say anything, and then 5 years down the road they're thinking, well, we got to work on this. I think they can. It's just very tough, and Gottman's research certainly backs that up. He would say that the emotional disconnection is very, very tough to get again. So if a couple comes in and I can still tell that they're emotionally connected, that's a good sign. Even though they're unhappy, if they're emotionally connected, that's a good sign.
So I'm trying to imagine how that comes about. How do you get to a point where you're emotionally disconnected? And I guess I'm thinking about it in terms of my own marriage. And Curtis and I are obviously very happy in our marriage. We're very emotionally connected. And I can't imagine how that could change other than we both got so busy, and maybe I've started a career, our kids are older, and we just stopped making time for each other. That's the
That's
only way
it.
I can. Yeah. Okay.
That's it.
That.
I mean, you just described it, because for a lot of families nowadays, they both have a career
Mm-hmm.
and they're both busy, and usually, they take a lot of time and they have kids. They come
Mm-hmm.
home. You want to spend time with the children. I see a lot of couples who then, after the kids are in bed, they continue working.
Mm.
They've got high stress careers where they believe that they need to be working all the time, that's a whole nother problem with, I think, the American workplace,
Yeah.
is that I think we require way too much, or we give way too much to our employers. And so I really advocate, you've got to come home, you end work, and you don't go back to work that night,
Mm-hmm.
because you've got to focus on the relationship. And so one of the things I do probably with most of the couples that I see is if they will leave in that first appointment, and I don't know them well, but they'll leave with the assignment that they have to go home and spend at least a half hour every night together, without a phone, without a TV,
Mm-hmm.
without a laptop or computer. They have to take an electronic break for a half hour and
Yeah.
just focus on each other. Now, it scares a lot of them, because
Mm-hmm.
they think, okay, what are we going to talk about? And I try and give them like rubbing shoulders, things like that, or rubbing each other's head, doing something soothing for each other. So they
Mm-hmm.
don't have to talk if they don't want to. Eventually, they probably will. If you want to have an emotional connection, you've got to create the context in the marriage in which that can occur. And if you aren't spending time together, it can't occur.
Yeah.
And nowadays, it's so easy for couples to do that.
Right. So I am thinking about, as you're saying all this, couples
Mm-hmm.
who work from home, which Curtis has been working from home for 3 years now. And I remember when he first started this job, worrying that we would get sick of each other. And we never did. And it's almost a catch 22, him working from home, because the problem is he's always at work.
And that's a problem, I
Yes,
think.
but the really big upside is he's always home. And so we see each other so much. In fact, it's almost kind of weird for us to go all day and not see each other. I remember like the first couple of times it happened, we're kind of like, I missed you. Like I didn't see you all day. And that's really weird for us because even though he's working, we're still constantly in contact. And I think that has definitely strengthened our relationship because we always know what's going on with the other person. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not that we, don't have or can't have separate lives, but we both really like that. I mean, he loves the flexibility. I love him being home. I get extra help sometimes throughout the day. And yeah, we both would say it really sucks when we put the kids to bed and he goes back to work because there's
Yeah.
times where that happens because again, he's always at work. But man, I love him working from home and I didn't think I would, but it's turned out to be a really good thing. And maybe some couples are thinking, yeah, no, I thought so too. And then this last year, the pandemic happened. I've been working from home and I'm sick of this person.
Right. I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
And so the last 18 months, I think, because often both are working from home. And
Mhm.
what I try and help them do is really have line, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, it really doesn't matter. They're done
Mhm.
with work.
Right.
And it's harder when you're both working from home because it's so easy to go sit down at your computer. You're doing everything online anyway.
Mhm.
And a lot of people, are working with someone in a different time zone. And so there's probably always someone that you can be doing some sort of work with.
Right.
But you have to change that. And I think employers take advantage of people sometimes. I think this is still true. In France, at least, they passed a law that you can't send work emails after like 5 o'clock
Huh.
in the evening.
Weird.
And I think you can't send them on weekends.
Huh.
And
Interesting.
the French are kind of controlling that way. But I think what they're after is there's got to be a break, that you
Yeah.
can't just work people, 24 hours a day. It just doesn't work well. So relationship wise, that can lead to that disconnect that we're talking about, which is the number one thing I see in couples. Here's the other part of it. As I think often, and this is going to be maybe too sex specific with, I think we raise females to have a better way of emotionally connecting. I think that's just often what we do. And we raise men not to do that well. And so for the vast majority of couples that come in, the wife's going to say, again, if they're a heterosexual couple, the wife's going to say, I don't feel connected to him. He doesn't talk to me. I have heard that so many times. And so one of the tasks we have is to help usually the male feel more comfortable with their emotions, being in touch with their emotions and being able to talk about it and being able to listen. Now, often what happens is males tend to focus on solution. The wife comes in and says, oh, this and this and this happened. And the husband saying, well, here's what you ought to do.
Yep.
And if you can pull back so that he doesn't go to solution and he's just listening, when they learn to do that, men feel much better about the marriage because it's not their job to solve everything.
Yep.
And then the emotional connection improves as well because they're listening to each other. Those are my top three reasons people seek divorce.
Right. And I think it comes back to men are from Venus, women are from Mars. I mean,
Right.
it really is true. And our brains really are wired so different. Oh, there's this really great video that I'm going to have to find where the psychologist talks about it. And he does it in a really funny way.
That's probably John Gray. John Gray is the guy who did Venus and Mars.
Oh, does he talk about men in the nothing box?
It's been a long time since I've seen it, but that could be him.
Okay. Anyways, they talk about how men have a nothing box where they can literally just think about nothing. And it baffles women. It baffles me. And I'm like, how can you think about nothing? I'm never thinking about nothing.
That makes so much sense to me. That's what I'm laughing. Because yes, I have a nothing box.
Yeah. And then the wives are like, well, can I get in the nothing box with you? And the husbands are like, no, because then it's the wife box. Then it's not.
Then it would be
box.
something. It wouldn't be nothing. It would be something.
Right? Yeah. I mean, our brains we might as well be two different species. So, I mean, it's no wonder that conflicts are going to happen. And anyways, we're wired different. And in a lot of ways, it's what gives us strengths because women tend to be more nurturing and more caring and more loving. And that makes us really good mothers. And men tend to be very focused and work driven, and that makes them really good providers. And that's not to say that those roles can't cross. Men can be very great at nurturing, women can be very good at working. But I think those differences are a good thing, and it's what makes us really strong as a society and what helps kids to be successful.
Well, I think the differences certainly are good, especially as parents. We bring different qualities to being parents. But I also think that nowadays, at least my experience is most women want something more from their husbands than just a paycheck. And I think the reason is they can go out and get their own paycheck now. And they do not need him to go get the paycheck. And so I really believe that it's important for men to learn how to step up and cross over into that emotional world. See, I think women have been able, let's call it the world of work and then the emotional work, although that,
Okay.
or the emotional world, and that's not a great distinction. But I think women have, for a long time, have been able to move between them pretty easily because, they're brought up that way to be those nurturers, so the emotional role of mother and connecting. And then they go into the world of work and they have to be in that role of solving problems. And so I think women move easily between those two. The only thing that forces men out of that role of solving problems in the world of work is their marriage. I think their children as well. So I think it's really men's job to step up and learn how to do this. And I really believe it's a skill. I think men can easily learn how to do this.
Absolutely.
And it makes better marriages.
Yeah. And even if it's doing something as simple as pitching in around the house unasked or taking time with the kids. Curtis and I have a family dynamic where he works, I'm a stay-at-home mom. And with 3 kids, well, nowadays, thankfully, people know and recognize just how busy a mom's job is. But we naturally divide our roles. And unfortunately, I can't really cross into Curtis's world because I can't help him with work. I don't have a degree. But he does step into mine and cross over, and he often helps me out with dinner. We both get the kids to bed. We're a team, and I think that you have to keep doing that, and you have to do that. You have to be a team in order to make a marriage work especially when there are kids. Or even if you are both working, you can't expect one person to do it all.
Right. And certainly men, I think, help statistically, fathers help more around the house. Now it's still not 50-50 though,
No.
by any means. It reminds me of a great book. I still have it in my bookshelf. It's called The Lazy Husband.
Okay.
But what was funny is the guy found that, so men wouldn't buy the book. Of course, called The Lazy Husband. I wish I could remember what he changed it to, because I then saw the guy had a book of a different title, and I opened it up and it was The Lazy Husband inside the book, just with a different title. But I think that, men aren't lazy. I think they just aren't brought up to do those types of things well, but they can learn how to do it. Here's what I hear from often wives is they want their husbands to be more present. And what that means is that they help around the house or help with the children without being asked, that they are present enough in the relationship that they see when the child needs something done for it, or when they see that the dishes need to be put away. Because if the wife is always the one asking, that puts her in a different role. That puts her in the role of mother, and that never works very well. And so you really want it to be equal. You're equally responsible for the running of the house and the raising of the children when you can. I mean, so, in your situation, hopefully there's sometimes when Curtis isn't working.
Yes.
And then at that point, you're equally responsible for the raising of the children and the running of the house.
Yeah, and he does do a good job. And so one thing that I would like to say to that is something that we talked about last week in Own Your Expectations. I think too often women get mad at men because they don't just jump in and pitch in. You need to express your expectations and say, hey, I want you to do this, and be very specific. Curtis has always been very, very willing to pitch in where I need him to. But I mean, he doesn't always just see something that needs done and do it. And I think men need to be clear as well. I think they need to be open and honest and being able to tell their wives, I had a really, really hard day at work.
Yeah, and sometimes that happens.
Yeah. Can I just take 30 minutes when I get home to decompress and be away from everyone? And wives, they need to understand it's got to be a team.
Right. And that's
really
a good strategy. That's a good strategy that we often talk about with couples is when you come home from work, take 30 minutes and put on your game face for the family. Yeah. Your father face, your husband face.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So this was great. Talked about a lot of good stuff. next week, we're going to be into the month of September. And September is National Suicide Awareness Month. So for the whole month of September, we're going to dedicate every episode of the podcast to suicide. So we're going to talk about a few different subjects. But to kick it off, I'm going to take a second look at suicide with Dr. Adrienne Burton Denmark. So this is Dr. Burton's daughter, and she is also a licensed psychologist that works in the same practice as Mark. And so we're going to get with her again. We're going to talk about suicide again, because it's something that I don't think can be talked about too much.
And when she was at the University of Texas at Austin doing her doctoral work, this was her area of focus, was suicide. So she knows a lot about it.
Yes, and she's very good with it. So if you have any stories you would like us to share, that's one of the things that I will be doing this coming month, is talking about someone who is very open about their experience with suicidality. So if you have anything you'd like to share, or any questions or anything you'd like to discuss on the topic, we'd love to hear from you, and we will see you all next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.